that this is a special meeting, and that we are required by law to only be able to discuss the specific topics as detailed on the special meeting agenda. Okay, so let's make sure that you know, if you come up to the podium and you have something to say, that we focus specifically on the facts associated with this specific ordinance. Now, that being said, I'm sure that there are a lot that would like to talk for possibly quite a long time. But this meeting is scheduled for approximately an hour to an hour and 15 minutes. I personally need to get out of here no later than 10:20. Now, we're starting this meeting at 10 after 9. I apologize for the limited amount of time to discuss this, but I'm hoping that you know, that we can get through this, and that the people of Livingston Parish and the people that participate in the development of Livingston Parish will be very familiar with the requirements of this ordinance, if so adopted next Thursday after this meeting is over. Okay, once again, I just want to thank everybody for coming. I know we have very important that we receive the support of the constituents and the people of Livingston Parish, you know, to help us do our job successfully. Okay. That being said, I'd like to do a roll call.
Mr. Talbert?
Here.
Mr. Mack?
Here.
Mr. Wascom?
Here.
Mr. Lidwell? Mr. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Averett? Mr. Ard?
Here.
Mr. King?
Here.
Mr. Girlinghouse?
Here.
Okay. Another point that I wanted to make sure that it was mentioned is we don't want to, I know that everybody's here is very concerned about this particular ordinance and what it means and what the effects are. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to get into, you know, blurting out, you know, your feelings about a particular topic, or trying to talk over somebody else. I really want to try to conduct a professional meeting that, you know, that's very respectful, okay? So what we want to do, and I really want to hear from the people in the gray seats in the audience today, okay? But what we really want to do is, if you have something that you think is very valuable as far as the interpretation of the requirements of this ordinance, then you need to raise your hand, okay? And then you need to allow me the opportunity to call on you and come to the podium, quickly introduce yourself and tell us who you are and where you're from, and then please don't repeat the same topics, but please try to get your message out within that 2 to 3 minute time frame, so that we give as many people as possible the opportunity to speak as possible. Okay. Now, and that goes for everybody, gentlemen. You know, if you have something to say, let's not try to overtalk somebody. Let's try to raise our hand and be fair to all. Okay?
Yep.
All right. Okay. Early on in our council careers, we had some ordinance committee meetings, and when we would go through the difficult decisions or difficult ordinances, we would have a meeting such as this, and we would just take the ordinance line by line and kind of go through and explain and try to figure out and make sure that we were, you know, understood exactly what that meant and what the outcome was. So that's basically what I'd like to do. And so let's run through that real quick. I think Gary is the author, if I'm not mistaken, of this particular ordinance. He is the ordinance committee chairman. And so what I'd like to do is call upon him, let him kind of read the different sections, like A, okay, or maybe the definitions, and then you know, see if somebody else can let's explain what each one means so that we can move through this pretty quickly. Okay, so Gary, would you like to start off, I guess, running through the purposes that, of this article, methods of reducing flood issues? Is that okay? I mean, you don't have to.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, I'll be glad to do it. I've asked some engineers to come speak and some drainage flood people to come address kind of the reason, but that's fine. We'll go through it initially and talk about it because, I mean, I think what we need to understand is this ordinance purpose is to protect the floodplain. I mean, that's the main gist of what we're trying to do here. But we'll go through, if you go down 1, 2, 3 are basically as they're existing now. 4, then you go, I don't know if everybody's got a copy of the ordinance. Did y'all make copies for
We did.
people?
We have
Okay,
this.
there's,
Yeah, absolutely.
huh? I don't know that we're gonna be able to get pictures or whatever. Okay, so we got pictures? Okay, so. Basically, A kind of defines, A says a proposed typical, I guess the thing, what I'm saying, this will become part of the permit process if approved. This will be, if you go to build a house, build a commercial building, build a shed, build whatever, this will become part of the permit process. So in the initial permit process, a proposed certificate of elevation shall be submitted for any structure to be built or placed on a lot prior to any permit being issued, which shall include but not limited to the following information: address, contractor, proposed elevation. And I've received some notes from engineers with respect to some of this information. Proposed elevation, base flood elevation, lowest natural ground for property, and there seems to the reason, and then explanation of how the elevation of the proposed structure is going to be achieved. The purpose of those 6 items is to determine how much fill or how much increase you need from the base, from the lowest part of your property, which probably needs some work to mean the lowest part of the property under where the structure is being built, to the proposed elevation of your property. Because this is to determine the calculation of how much fill you have. If your property's at 10 and you need to be, BFE needs to be 12, and you're within 2 feet, then basically that information says that you're gonna be within the fill ordinance. I mean, it's just the basic way to create the calculation on how much fill you need to get from where your property is to where your slab needs to be. B says individual lots, tracts.
Well, hey, excuse me, I'm sorry. But what I wanted to do was kind of slow down. Let's take A and kind of go through it, Gary, if it's okay with y'all, and kind of ask questions and kind of take A, spend about maybe 10 minutes on A, and if there's any questions about A, and then once we kind of go through that real quick to make sure, I mean, because I got some questions on A, but I don't want to have to, I'd like to go ahead and be able to ask them now, if that's okay with y'all.
Probably if we had some engineers or, floodplain people make some presentations about what they perceive this ordinance to do, then I think you might find the answer to a lot of your questions would be answered by 1 or 2 people coming up and speak, not me, but experts that kind of, but we'll do it any way you want to.
Okay. Okay, so A, guys, it's calling for a proposed certificate of elevation. Is to be submitted for any structure to be built or placed on a lot prior to any permit being issued, okay? So this would be in the permitting process if you were to build some type of structure anywhere in Livingston Parish. My question is this would be for any building a structure in any part of Livingston Parish. Is that correct?
True.
Okay. So I have another question too, is I mean, it's kind of simple, you know, when you go to get a building permit, you know, you gotta put your address, contractor, or I guess if you're building it yourself, I guess you would have to have some type,
That's outside of municipalities.
Yeah.
okay.
Not anywhere in the parish, but yeah.
Thanks for that information. This is outside the municipalities that current have their own government entities that don't follow, you know, the parish ordinances to build their structures.
Okay.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay, so, and it's requiring that you have a certificate of elevation. Who would actually perform this so-called, or provide this certificate of elevation? Can anybody here at this meeting, or Gary, can you quickly answer that question if you know the answer?
Surveyor, engineer.
Okay, this gentleman over here, can you quickly come to the podium and answer that question?
Y'all doing? Eddie Idell, Alvin Fairman Associates. Typically, it'd be a civil engineer or a professional land surveyor. Those are the people that are allowed to prepare the elevation certificates. So that's the person that you would typically get to do a proposed. It would be my opinion that you would require to be either a professional land surveyor or a professional civil engineer. And just so this question will probably come up, my guess is you'd be 150 to 250 bucks is what that service would cost. Maybe a little more depending on the surveyor or engineer.
Okay, that's
that it
good.
would cost the homeowner.
That's good information. Let me ask you one more question, Eddie. When you said typically, okay, typically in Livingston Parish, I mean, what specifically do you mean? When is a flood elevation required today? And what do you mean typically? What is being performed today as far as a flood elevation certificate? Can you quickly explain that? We kind of, I apologize again, we're on a time constraint here.
Currently in unincorporated Livingston Parish,
Uh-huh.
you're only required to get an elevation certificate if you are within a 100-year flood zone, a zone A or AE. This would change that to in a 100-year flood zone or outside. So, you know, like you already discussed, they would require it for every structure. But I understand the reasoning for that. If you guys choose to adopt this ordinance, then you really need to do that, because otherwise you won't have the data that you need to make this determination for areas outside of the 100-year floodplain.
Okay, so, question is today, when you go get a base flood elevation certificate, this to me is an important part of this process. Okay, so the surveyor comes out and there's a reference point, right? And so he's shooting your property where your house pad or where your future structure is going to be built. Is that the only parcel or piece, location? Is that basically what he's shooting? What I mean by that is if you have acre and a half, you know, and half of it's full of trees, you know, and you're building on the front half that's clear. Today's world, he's coming out and he's taking a couple of quick shots of your property where your structure is going to be built, and I don't know that much about this process.
Yeah,
Is why I'm
I can
asking these
explain.
questions.
Yeah, I can
so you don't have to shoot the whole entire property. So to me, my real question is about cost. If it was required for that surveyor to shoot that entire parcel of property to meet the requirement, if I'm understanding this correctly, and I may not be, the lowest natural ground for the property, okay, can you explain a little bit more the requirements there that would be required by that? And maybe, I mean, would the cost associated with that be a roundabout reason? Or I mean, what
Yeah,
would be
I know
associated with that? I mean, because what if you had 5 acres? Because what would
way
be
it
the cost
should-
there?
The way it should read to kind of match the elevation certificate is the lowest natural ground adjacent to the structure. So, which is what we do now, and I hadn't read this in a couple of days, but if it doesn't say it, it should say the lowest natural ground adjacent to the structure. That would be a change you probably would want to make to clear up that, because that's what the intent is, you know, on the elevation certificate. You can have 2,000 acres. You simply ask your client, where are you putting the structure? He says it's going to be by the big live oak in the front. So you go and you shoot the natural ground at that location. When you make your first site visit, to set a nail in a tree or a pole to show him how high he has to build to be above the base flood elevation. So I would make
Okay.
that change. I'd recommend it. if
Yeah, I
it's
think I
not
noted,
like that.
yeah, I know,
Yeah.
I think we're aware of, in the discussion with engineers, that was a change that probably need to be made.
So
Okay.
Eddie, while you're out there, if the guy's planning to build a pole barn in, or a barn, they could probably shoot that same spot for just a little bit of difference in the price, if anything. So he would know then, he wouldn't have to go back again and
You're
get some.
saying, Scooter, if he's building two structures?
Let's say he's building
Yeah,
a
we-
home and then they go, I'm gonna build a big barn back here. Well, okay, well, I need to know what the lowest, BFE is there also.
Yeah, we'll usually give them a little cut rate if we're doing
Right.
multiple certificates on multiple structures
Okay.
on the same site, like you're saying,
Sure.
in that whole package now, depending on where it's at in the parish for us, and depending on which surveyor engineer you get, for the elevation part, right now, it's at least 2 trips you gotta make. One to, you don't fill out a proposed certificate, but you go out there and you collect the data that you would to fill out a proposed certificate. You set them a benchmark, you shoot a natural ground, and that's the information that the homeowner would use to build the structure or the barn, the home,
Anything,
whatever it
okay.
is he's building. And then right now, you have to make another trip, at least one more trip, to do a final, once the slab is poured. So,
They're now requiring it on the board before it's like.
DD&M require, under construction?
Yeah.
Okay, so we do have to make 3 trips now.
But that doesn't.
Okay, so
but that-
y'all
but
would
that-
kinda-
But Eddie,
We kinda-
but Eddie, those 3 trips are not affected by this ordinance. Those are 3
Really,
trips you're making anyway.
Really, it wouldn't. You could do the proposed when you do.
Well,
when
let's,
you do the
let's,
first site.
let's try to, for time constraints, quick blurting out here, but, I guess I got a question, Gary, is if today in flood zone X, you're not required to have this flood elevation certificate, and then this ordinance, if so adopted, requires it,
Yeah, then I
It-
acknowledge it's gonna cost,
it
it's gonna
definitely
raise the
would-
cost of building a house in flood zone X by $200, $250.
okay?
If you
But-
build a
Well,
tool
let's,
shed,
let's,
you have to get a permit as well?
so let's ask some questions specifically, y'all. Okay, so this lowest natural ground, property location, okay, if you're in flood zone X, I mean, this was one of the clarifications, y'all, that I really needed from somebody, is, are there numbers, predetermined numbers on base flood elevation in flood zone X today?
No, so there's
Okay.
no requirement to build to any specific elevation in a zone.
But what I mean is if you sent a surveyor out there to survey the property, and you made the statement, or somebody made the statement, this is gonna be, the reference point is gonna be the base flood elevation. What, the reference point is the lowest part of the property adjacent to the structure?
Well-
So,
My interpretation, Shane, would be in a zone X, the surveyor or engineer would go to the site and they would transfer a benchmark to that site, which is the real reference, which is, now most everybody does it with GPS, but they could run from another benchmark. So they'll drive a nail, if it's in a zone X, you're just gonna drive a nail in a tree or a power pole, and you're gonna tell the homeowner that elevation is elevation 30. And then you're gonna shoot natural ground, and that's it. And then you're gonna have to converse with the homeowner and ask him, how high above natural ground do you intend to build it? Because right now, you can dig a hole and build it, because you're in a zone X. So
So-
you would have that conversation with the homeowner to be able to fill out the form that the parish creates for this proposed certificate.
So basically what I'm asking here, Eddie, is this. Is this a change in the current way that the base flood elevation certificate is the work process to generate it? I mean, how does the surveyor know, and who goes? I mean, I just got so many questions about this. Who's going to communicate to the surveyor exactly the intent and what's needed and how that is going to work? How is that?
For in a zone X, to me, if I'm interpreting correctly, it's gonna be pretty simple. It's gonna be one trip to the site to establish, an elevation. You're gonna shoot natural ground. And when you take the work order from the client, you're gonna say, now look, how high, you are in a zone X, so how much dirt do you intend to bring in? Because you can bring in no dirt, 6 inches of dirt, or a foot, because you're in a zone X. There isn't, so the base flood elevation would be a NA. You put a not applicable on that line if you're in a zone X.
Okay, so I got another question for the parish president's office. If there's anybody here that can, from the parish president's office, that can answer this question, is how do these changes, if this ordinance is adopted, how does it affect the permitting process? And I mean, do we currently have the resources to be able to provide this service? Is there anybody here that can answer that question from the parish president's office?
Well, I'm not involved in the permit department as far as permits actually are.
This is Sam DiGeronimo. He is currently the planning director for Livingston Parish.
Well, I'm just saying that they come to the permit. We don't know how to handle this until it happens. I mean, I can't say how much extra it's gonna be, because I don't know exactly, this hadn't been adopted. So, I mean, these folks come to the permit office, and they get their permits, and they get their elevation.
Yeah.
An elevation, a lady that gives out these elevations that FEMA presents to the parish. So, until the adoption is made, we don't really know what's involved.
Okay, so we really, at this point in time, Sam DiGeronimo, the planning director for Livingston Parish, is saying, at this point in time, we don't know if we have the resources available to abide by this, or know
I'm not saying
the
we
cost
don't, or I'm not
associated
saying we
with
do. I don't
this
know.
to the taxpayers?
I don't know.
Okay,
There again, because you haven't adopted the official copy, I don't know what you're gonna do.
okay. Okay, well, as introduced is what we're going off of today, you know? Okay, so that's something we would also need to kind of work out the kinks of. We really need to move on to B, so if you can ask this question and kind of summarize this specific, just about A. I think we've talked about A enough, guys. Let's come on up and let's, this is just directed towards A of this ordinance, and if you can just quickly run through
Tim
what you need to
Kenton,
say.
12990 Secular Drive, Walker, Louisiana.
Uh-huh.
How does requiring an elevation certificate in flood zone X, and I'll ask the engineers, how does this prevent any flooding or protect the drainage waves? How does requiring that in a flood zone
Now
X
that-
protect that?
Now, that question right there would probably take a couple of weeks to answer, you know, but maybe there's somebody in here, I'd like to go on and move on to B. That's a very good question, but I think that it would take a lot of
The whole
explanation to be able to answer that question. Gary, if you can answer this in about
the
a
whole,
minute and a
the
half.
whole purpose of A, the whole purpose of everything in A is to determine how much dirt you intend, how much fill you intend to put on that property to get to the elevation of the top of your slab. It is purely a matter of calculation. Basically, what this ordinance says, we'll talk later, it'll give you 24 or 36 inches depending on the size of your lot. That A is to determine whether you fall within that calculation. That's all it is. If you do not fall within that calculation, then 6 will tell the permit office how you plan on achieving the elevation of your slab if you fall outside of the 24 or 36 inches that are allowed by section B.
Okay. Good answer. Let's move forward. Okay?
Okay, section B basically is, there's B1 and B2. They basically say the same thing except for the size of the lot and the amount of fill. 1 says fill shall be limited to 24 inches or less on lots smaller than a half acre. Should more fill need to be placed on one of the following, it will need to be provided documentation to show there is equal volume of storage provided below natural ground on the same property as the volume of fill used on the site above the 24-inch limitation. That basically allows you to mitigate the dirt you put on the ground on your property. If you have a property that you're able to dig the dirt on there, and you can show that you have freeboard or dry retention on that property to accommodate an equal amount of dirt, then you can be exempt from the 24-inch limit. B, drainage calculations by a licensed civil engineer in the state of Louisiana for the property proving that by allowing additional fill there, there is no adverse effects to the adjacent waterways, properties, landowners, structures, and floodplain for the 100-year design storm. And that basically says that if you want to go above the 24 inches, which the parish is giving you the ability to do without any additional documentation, you have to prove that there is no negative impact. 2 basically says the exact same thing, except if your lots are a half acre or above, then the fill shall be limited to
Can
30.
I'm sorry again. Can we just stick to one real
Well,
quick?
they're identical. The same discussion on one
Okay.
will be on 2.
Okay,
So
keep moving
if
forward.
we're gonna make this thing go faster, let's talk about them together.
All right.
So 2 basically says that if your lot is bigger than a half acre, then you're limited to 36 inches. And if you choose to go above 36 inches, you have to do one of 2 things. Mitigate it on site and basically have an engineer show that you have the dry retention or freeboard capable of holding the equivalent amount of runoff that's being displaced by the dirt, or that you can have an engineer basically say that they're proved that there's no negative impact. Now, I want to make one statement about that an engineer sent me a note on, and it was in an email, and I'm gonna read it for y'all real quick. And I don't want to hide anything. I want to clarify this completely. And the engineer said, it will be difficult for an engineer to certify this. It can be argued that any fill placed in a special flood hazard area will have a negative effect. If the intent is not fill mitigation, but just to ensure runoff from one property to the other does not adversely affect the neighbor, you could also add a provision that the toe end of the fill is further than, and he said some distance from the property line than the condition met. So to make a note, and I want everybody to be aware that basically an engineer has said that if the property is in a special hazard flood zone, I forget the actual legal term, but if you're in A or AE, basically the ability for an engineer to say there's no negative impact is impossible, because placing any dirt within that thing it has a negative impact on the floodplain. So basically, even though that's the wording, that would allow you in X to do that, but it would not allow you to do it in AE, because what the goal here is to protect the floodplain. So basically, that's what an engineer said. If anybody has any discrepancy or disagrees, step up and explain why he was incorrect. But I wanted to read that to the record so everybody would know that, that basically this ordinance would create the ability in A and E, basically you could go to 36 inches or 24 inches respectively, or do fill mitigation, or change the design. But to have an engineer tell you that you're not gonna have an impact on your neighbor is virtually impossible.
Okay, thanks for being honest about that, Gary. Okay, I got a couple of questions. If anybody else has questions, just feel free to raise your hand. We're gonna try to move on forward. I'd like to be honest with you.
You got one out there, Shane.
I'd like to be, yes, sir. Y'all ask some questions. You go first.
My name's Randy Delat, Moreport, Louisiana.
what we in the ordinance is looking for, we not, I know engineers know what the technical terms, XA and AE, which I happen to do and y'all do, but a lot of other people don't. We're not looking for anything technical. We're looking to see how the ordinance affects us as a homeowner. And instead of going line by line saying this and that, we want to know why we come up with the number 2 foot or 3 foot for field. We want to see proof that this works. And that's what we want to talk about. If that's possible, we could do that in this meeting.
We can do that real quick. I think we can still go through line by line.
I mean, I can answer why 24 and 36 was inserted.
We will give you that opportunity. You go. Why did we come up with 24 and 36?
24
We're going to come to you next, I
20
promise.
24 and 36 are arbitrary numbers. 24 and 36, I mean, if this ordinance was really doing what it ought to be, that number should be 0 and 0. And look at what we have in the pushback on 24 and 36. If we were serious about protecting the floodplain and doing the most that we could absolutely do to protect the floodplain, those numbers would be 0 and 0. But the pushback would be tremendous. So in essence, what we're trying to do is take a step in the right direction and show where there's benefit to everybody within the floodplain to protect the floodplain. Because if we get time later on, there's going to be testimony from some gravity drainage districts that if we don't protect the floodplain, if we don't stop stacking dirt within the floodplain, that the ability to protect or demonstrate to reduce flooding in the future is going to be virtually impossible, because we're going to have to be able to retain water to make stuff work. And the more dirt we stack in the floodplain, the harder it is to retain water. So ultimately, this ordinance is a compromise to try to move us in the right direction. If we were trying to do the absolute stopgap to do exactly what ought to be done, those numbers should be 0 and 0. But I'm not prepared to set forth 0 and 0, because I believe that the hardship would be too much. But we've got to start moving in the right direction to protect the floodplain.
Okay, so just summarizing that for my own sake.
I mean,
Where did you come up with the 24 and the 36 inches, Gary? I mean, just kind of.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, because
just felt like that was something that
well,
you could
and
get past.
if you read ordinances in other parishes, those are limits that have been placed historically that show impact, or an improved impact on the floodplain, and some of it's related to lot size. And because it's virtually impossible on smaller lots to stack dirt up and protect your neighbor from a localized runoff if you get too high. So that was the reason for 24 on smaller lots and 36 on larger lots. I mean, ideally, like I said earlier, the number would be 0. But this is an effort to improve things. And I'm gonna make
Okay.
a little. I'm gonna make
Real
a
quick,
quick.
real quick. Go ahead. Real quick.
Earlier in some of the debate or some of the discussion in the ordinance committee, you know, there was a comment made that 36 was arbitrary and it could not be defended in court, and based on a discussion of an Ascension Parish ordinance. And I think what the person misinterpreted is that Ascension Parish ordinance that was being discussed was Ascension has a net 0 fill with respect to with subdivisions and commercial development. And on top of the net 0 fill, there's a discussion of trying to arbitrarily limit the fill on a subdivision to 36 inches, even though you could go 48 or 60 and still achieve net 0 fill. And that was why the comment was made by the engineer in the audience that 36 inches is arbitrary, because the way their ordinance is written, you're looking for net 0. And so if you can accomplish net 0 by stacking dirt above 36 inches, to arbitrarily limit to 36 inches would not be fair. So that was the difference between that 36 inches and this situation where we're talking about 24 inches or 36 inches of fill.
So
I
real
don't
quick,
think,
just to summarize, go ahead, Mr. Bubba.
I don't think that the ordinance has been passed in Ascension Parish yet.
Well,
For the whole entire parish.
The
no.
net zero fill's been passed, and I think it's something they've been operating under. The ability to amend that to say the limit of 36 inches on a net zero fill development has not been passed. And is there somebody that's been to some of those Ascension Parish meetings? I'm fairly accurate that net zero is the way they're operating, Eddie, but
They have a field mitigation ordinance for sure.
Right, but
I don't know the exact details.
But the limiting the 36 inches was outside the field mitigation ordinance, I think, has not been passed.
I would like to answer that question.
They going to.
I'd like to answer that question.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I spoke with a councilman from Ascension Parish the other day, and I could have misinterpreted what he said, but he said that they were going to look at a similar ordinance today at their council meeting, that for the whole entire Ascension Parish, they did not have, at this current time, a restriction on fill dirt. You know, that they did have it in certain areas, you know, like you mentioned, the commercial developments and the residential subdivision developments, but it was not a parish-wide ordinance, unless I misunderstood what he was saying. That's exactly what he told me. Now, let's go grab this question that we had over here. Has your question been answered already? We're going to need you to come just tell who you are real quick.
B, not approvable, is it amended or wiped out?
Come see. We need to be able to hear what you're saying, record it and everything for the minutes.
If B is not provable, is it amended or eliminated?
Well, Dan, in an X zone, it would be provable. So as long as the X zone is part of this ordinance, then you could utilize that part in an X
So
zone.
in an X zone, an engineer could prove that it would have no adverse effect.
Right, and based on the engineer's comments to me, it would be virtually impossible to prove it in AE, but it could be proved in X.
Okay, so if it's not provable in AE, is that eliminated?
Yes.
I have a question.
Well, it won't be eliminated unless,
I mean,
unless the ordinance is modified.
Yeah, it wouldn't be eliminating the ordinance, but it would basically not be an option that was available in A&E.
I have a question.
Okay, so John Wascom has a question.
Yeah.
You try to make it as quick as possible,
Yeah,
John.
I'll try to. I have a couple questions, and maybe Mr. Idell can help me answer this. In the August 2016 flood, storm water, which is what we're talking about, the river swells up and it flooded the west side of Livingston Parish. I mean, most of us all got water in that flood. Had this ordinance been enacted years back, or would this ordinance stop that from happening again?
Certainly wouldn't have stopped.
Certainly would not, and it probably so.
In some cases, John, it could have helped in some cases for sure. But how much of a positive effect, that would certainly be hard to quantify.
I mean, if someone who's in that floodplain would have brought dirt in and raised their house up, if that happened, then they wouldn't have flooded, correct? If they'd have been above the water.
Absolutely.
So you're saying that person saved their house, but because of the dirt, they might have pushed it up on someone else. Is that what you're saying?
Could have.
They saved their house.
Anytime you reduce storage.
So this ordinance is dealing with back flooding, and I thought I've heard you and other people say that this really doesn't affect, this ordinance is not for back flooding or that type of flood. I mean, I've heard Mr. Talbot say that in the meeting, and I've heard engineers say that. So
I think what I said was, given the impact of the 2016 flood, that this ordinance wouldn't make a lot of difference.
thank you.
Okay, good
Do
response.
you agree with that?
Now,
So this ordinance will make no difference in that back flooding
Because
problem?
that flood event was so many feet above base flood
Okay.
that in most cases.
It
if
wouldn't
you
have made a
would've
difference.
flooded, you would have
You-
flooded.
it doesn't
either way.
matter. Okay.
Because most people don't build 3, 4, 5 feet above base flood.
I've got
But
another,
on the same token, some people are doing it now specifically because
Of that.
2016.
And that's pretty smart, I would think.
Okay, so-
And I
Okay,
do
so
have
wait,
one more
so
question.
let's
Wait,
quit
wait,
cutting
so
in.
Eddie,
Gary.
if we stack the dirt up, if we continue to stack the dirt up and we have another event, will all that stacked dirt cause the water if given everything the same, and we have more dirt in the floodplain, will that raise the level, will that raise the peak flood level?
In a lot of cases, yes.
Thank you. But if
Wait,
we would,
wait, wait.
if we
Minimal.
would,
Very minimal.
Now, what we don't want to do is get into arguing back and forth and have opinions here, guys. What we really want to do is just ask questions and stick to the answers to the questions specifically to this. So if you have a question about the interpretation or,
Oh, I got
or
one
what these
more.
effects would have on the people of Livingston Parish, then you just move on forward. And then Gary, if you want to, if you know, you have the right to rebuttal because, you know, somebody's accusing you of saying something that may be incorrect, then just wait till he's finished and then you can go, buddy. And then, so John, let's
do have
hurry
one-
up and
I have
finish
one more
answering your
question.
question.
Also in this ordinance, it says that if you're gonna bring the dirt in to build a slab for a house, you can only extend the top of that pad that your slab sits on 24 inches out from your house. Mr. Idell, my question to you is this. If you were building a house, or if you were recommending on someone to build a house, and they said, how far should I put my pad away, the top of my pad away from the slab of my house, how far should I go? What would you tell them? Would you tell them 24 inches is a great number, or would you rather have that pad extended out further?
We recommend a minimum of 10 to 15 feet.
10 to 15 feet, and this ordinance says you can only go 24 inches past your slab. Why is that in there? I mean, this ordinance is, I'm
Yeah.
struggling with it. Give me some engineering reasons why this is in here.
I didn't write the ordinance, but I do think it's something that you guys should discuss, because if you limit it to 2 feet, I think that potentially the parish could open themselves up
To liability.
Liability. If somebody has some foundation problems, they could say, hey, you know, you didn't allow me to follow good engineering practice.
Thank you
So-
for your honest and legitimate answer, Eddie. That was
Thanks, Eddie.
very sincere.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a question, and it's a legitimate question, and it's gonna be a real quick one. Where did we get the half acre versus anything bigger than half acre? I mean, personally, if you got 0.49 acres, I mean, what, you got 0.49 acres, you're required, you can only go to 24, and basically what you're saying is you're gonna have an extremely hard time proving that there's no negative impact. You're gonna be limited if you got 0.49 acres of property. You could be surrounded by woods and not even in a residential area, you know, but you're gonna be limited on how much dirt you can put on there. Where did we come up with those numbers? Did we mimic another ordinance from another parish or something? I mean, how did we
yeah,
determine
I basically that there is a cutoff that with respect to the size of your lot that kind of determines how much dirt you can put on it and still fall within the slope and still maintain the buffer zone, and that's why the cutoff is what it is. We could make it 24 inches on all property, but to make it 36 inches on some small lots is not achievable. So, I mean, what we tried to do was allow the larger landowner or the larger lot the ability to put more dirt, because it would not be as big an impact on their neighbor with respect to runoff.
Okay, good answer. So, come on up and ask your question quickly, because we're approaching 10 o'clock and this needs to be over by about 10:20.
Two things I would like, one, I'd like to clarify, what Mr. Talbot was quoting me from a couple of weeks ago, where I quoted the Ascension Parish, and I'll read it from the Advocate. Councilwoman Terry Cassio said to her colleagues on the panel last week that she was concerned that a proposed one-size-fits-all rule would be considered arbitrary, a key legal term that can be grounds to block government actions in court. And when asked where the 3 foot came from, she said, "I do not know." That's just to clarify my statement from a couple of weeks ago.
Thank you. Is there anything further?
Yes. This 24 inches and 36 inches and a half acre or less, or a half acre or more, is one size fits all. And this parish will one day get sued over it from a landowner. I've asked Mr. Talbot on several occasions if he sticks with the guidelines that are proposed as far as, and let the lot width and the house width determine how much fill could be placed there, placing it and even extending the house pad out 10 feet past the foundation, go to your 3-on-1 slope, stop it at 8 foot from the property line so you can create a swell ditch, let the lot determine how much fill you can put in there. That makes it fair for everybody. If you've got a bigger, wider lot, then you can build your fill up higher and you don't affect your neighbor.
Thank you very much for that information. Another quick question I have, real quick. What was the intent or thought process when it says documentation to show there is an equal volume of storage provided below natural ground? Is there anyone here that can explain what type of documentation you're referring to? I mean, to me, that is very, very gray. I mean, you pretty much could just present anything. And who specifically within our permitting process is going to make the decision that that documentation is acceptable?
Well,
Who's going to do that?
I'm gonna be honest with you. So consequently, there was a comment by another engineer, and I think what he said was that we need to have an engineer document the space in the pond. So basically, if you're gonna dig a pond or dry retention, then the engineer needs to calculate how much freeboard you have. Otherwise, I don't think you would have, something that would be, I mean, look,
Okay, good answer. Let's move forward. I think that's a great answer. I don't want to just keep rambling on. All right, so is there an engineer here that can quickly put a cost associated with providing that type of documentation? Or how much, I mean, just is there anybody here that can come up and just give us a general interpretation or just tell us what we're dealing with here? Is there anybody here that can do that?
Come on, Billy.
Okay, so Billy, if somebody says, hey man, I want to put 30 inches of dirt on my half-acre lot, and the parish is telling me I can't do it unless I provide documentation to show that there's an equal volume of storage provided below, how are you going to do that? And in adjacent, or in, another question I have while you're still standing there is, if I'm moved to number 2 and I've got 5 acres, and I want to go 5 feet, okay, what type of documentation would you provide? And I don't want to throw your revenue out there on the street, but what would be just a general idea of how much this would cost an average home builder in Livingston Parish in flood zone X?
All right, so if I'm gonna say look at item 1A, documentation to show that, we get asked to do it a lot of times in Ascension Parish. We do a flood mitigation plan. So I have to send a survey crew out there and get shots of the area they're building, but also shots of the area that they're gonna remove dirt from. We bring that information back in and we draw up a plan and we do the calculation. We show it on our field mitigation plan. We submit it. Generally, when people call, we just tell them a ballpark estimate's going to be around $1,500, but we'll look at it case by case basis. And that's maybe half a day crew out in the field collecting that data. Then another probably a full day of the engineering, drawing it up, doing the calculations.
So per my calculations, we're up right now at about $2,000 for the individual private property owner in Livingston Parish, above what today it costs to build a house in flood zone X. So we're right about $2,000 with this flood elevation certificate, and then hiring an engineer to provide documentation that if you want to go above, the 24 inches on a half-acre lot surrounded by woods. Is that what I'm hearing, guys?
If that's required.
Okay, so let's move on forward. Thank you for that information there, Mr. Billy. All right, so I got one more question. I mean, these are very serious questions, very serious ordinance. To me, we wrote the ordinance, and it's pretty close to the same rules as far as documentation or drainage calculation requirements, whether you on 20 acres or a half acre. Can somebody explain why we did such on, why are the requirements the same for large tracts of property versus extremely small tracts of property. Is there anybody here that can maybe justify that?
You wanna know why the ordinance is written?
I
so
would
that-
like to know that.
I mean, basically, the ordinance is written to protect the floodplain. So in doing that, we gave the property owner the ability, depending on the size of their lot, to raise it 24, if this ordinance is passed, we give the property owner the ability to raise it 24 or 36 inches, and I think that cost's gonna be $250 to prove all that information. And if you were in A&E, it's no additional cost, because you gotta have flood elevation certificate anyway. So the additional cost really come in if you choose to go above 24 or 36 inches. So, and the reason being is to do the engineering work to show that there's no negative impact on your neighbor. Now, I mean, I've got slides up here that show what we're doing now, and we can put pictures up now, and I can't see them, but this is what's going on in our parish currently, under the ordinances that we have now. Basically, what we're doing now and what we're allowing is people to stack dirt up, unchecked, by their neighbor. What we got up here? Which one we got? And those are two houses. If you look at this picture, right? Go back, can you back up? Huh? Okay. Back up a little bit. Can you back up? Is that possible? Right there. Is that, let's see. No, go forward.
I want to know that.
Okay.
Go forward. Okay.
We didn't have anybody who worried about it 100 years ago.
Freeze that picture. Okay, see that house right there and his neighbor's house right? We can't freeze it. Is that, you can't pause them? Is that? Okay. See this picture? See those two houses? See that house in the background? That house in the background is, I don't know, 6 foot higher than the house in the foreground. 6 or 7 foot higher. You see that silver, that gray, white area? That's concrete poured beside that house to stop erosion. That's concrete. That's what happens if you don't have a 3-to-1 slope. That's what happens when you have no rules with respect to how you build a foundation or how high you pile up dirt. They, huh? Huh?
That looks like a subdivision.
Well, what it is it kind of is a subdivision, but it's a subdivision. Well, no, Howard, this is part of the permit process. This has nothing to do with a subdivision.
Gary, can you wrap this up real quick?
Yeah, so flash on through. Basically, what you've got, I think we're gonna see a front shot of that picture. Go, basically, this ordinance is gonna be addressed at the permit process. So, you're right, if you have a subdivision that's been built that's old, and you're on the second or third elevation, then it's definitely gonna be impacted. But you can see how high we're stacking dirt beside people and how we're running dirt straight onto people's property under the current regulation.
All right, thanks, Gary, for hurrying. Thanks, Gary. I know you wanted to talk longer, but I appreciate you.
Well, we timed it straight, we got it, you know.
I agree. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, thanks, everybody. Real quick, in order to, thank you. Okay, so there's no doubt we have many drainage problems in Livingston Parish. That's all I'm going to say about that. Okay, moving forward, I think we did do a good job, guys, of going through 1 and 2. You know, kind of explaining what it meant. Everybody asked some questions. We can move forward. I would also like to say that it's true we're on a time frame here, and I need to wrap this up by 10:20. if this doesn't have to be the end of this discussion, there's a public hearing on May the 9th. The meeting starts at 6:30, and we would invite each and every citizen, vendor, anyone, concerned, living in Livingston Parish, practicing business in Livingston Parish, concerned about this ordinance and the ramifications that it'll have, on future development.
Hey, Jay,
Gary's got something real quick to say, and then we're gonna move on to number 3.
well, I'm gonna be honest. 3, 4, 5, and 6 are three basically says that we're gonna limit. John's addressed it. Eddie's given his opinion that we're gonna limit fill to 24. At 24 inches outside, and then from that we're gonna slope 3 to 1. So in essence, you do end up with more than just 24 inches outside the foundation. It might not be on the same level, but it is going to be sloping away at a 3 to 1 slope that is very manageable way to handle water. 4.
Wait, I got questions about number 3. And I just need clarification because I might have misinterpreted this. Now, number 3 says fill shall be limited regardless.
It doesn't say
If you
regardless
have,
anywhere.
well, no, I agree, but it says, fill shall be limited to the foundation structure and shall not extend more than 24 inches horizontally beyond the limits of the foundation before it slopes. My question is, to me, now that says, to me, the way I interpret that is, regardless of how much dirt you're placing on your property, you can go put 4 inches of dirt on your property to build your house pad, you're gonna be limited to the size of your house pad, because it does not say anything in any way, shape, or form about if the height or how much dirt you put on your pad. It just simply says, fill dirt shall be limited to the foundation structure and shall not extend more than 24 inches horizontally. So what I'm saying here is if you have 5 acres of property, you're limiting people if they build a shed on the size of their house pads, because if you go 3 to 1, eventually you're going to run out of, your one's going to become 0, and you're not going to have any more, house pad. To me, you're limiting, what you're trying to do is write an ordinance that may work for a specific area, to govern every single piece of structure across all of Livingston Parish. And to me, what that says there, people of Livingston Parish, is that regardless if you put 1 foot of dirt on your property, that you're limited to the size of the pad. And so what I did when I built my house was I wanted my pad to be compacted, and so what I did was I built the pad about 1 foot above the road, because I was thinking that I'd heard some old timers say that if you built a house 1 foot above the road, then the water would run over the road south before it ran in your house. So I built my house 1 foot above the road, and I put my pad down about a year before I built the house. Okay? So then we went later on in life and picked out my house, and built it. And to me, if I was to follow this particular ordinance exactly the way it's written, I would have to probably go back after the fact and dig out my house pads such that I met the 24-inch rule, around the structure. So I definitely, am I interpreting this correctly is my question. Can anybody answer that question? And if not, Gary, can you quickly answer if that's the case?
The ordinance is written in such a manner that the pad that the house is built on at the elevation of the slab can only extend 24 inches past edge of slab. At that point in time, it can slope 3 to 1 down to natural ground. And depending on the height of the dirt, it will depend on how wide the pad can be. Also, the width of the lot will determine how high you can go, because you need to maintain an 8-foot buffer zone between the toe where the dirt toes in the natural ground, or where it goes from whatever elevation down to natural ground, you need an 8-foot buffer zone between that and the edge of the property.
So
And-
basically, I'm sorry for cutting you off.
So,
You
I mean,
finish.
yeah, I mean,
Quickly.
I mean, depending on when you pile the dirt up, you might have to come do some grading after the fact to make your house pad fit your ordinance if you piled a bunch of excess dirt. What we fail to realize in this whole ordinance is this ordinance is here to protect the floodplain. What I would like to do, I mean, y'all can do what you want to. We've, got 15 minutes left before we got in this? We have got some representatives of the largest gravity drainage district in the parish. And they would like to speak on what their efforts are and why protecting the floodplain is important. I think that's what we fail to understand, that protecting the floodplain is ultimately the most important thing with respect to the parish continuing to move forward. And I think that representatives from your gravity drainage district ought to be able to come up and explain how protecting the floodplain is important, not only to Denham and Gravity One, but to the entire parish.
Okay, that's a very good point, and I would 100% agree with you. The problem is we're limited on time today, and that if we need that to happen, we can have another meeting.
Mr. Mack,
Sir?
we can
But
have another meeting. These gentlemen are here.
Yeah, this is the
taking
most
time out
important
of their
thing that
day.
we need to understand.
I'm willing to discuss this at length until we get the answers quick. I mean, I don't want to do anything knee jerk. Nobody here does. I certainly don't. So if you're considering whether until the answers are answered to build to the level that I'm comfortable with, I won't vote on this. But these gentlemen are here to speak, so I think we should let them speak. Any question you have, I promise you will get answered in a manner that you can either you'll agree with or you won't.
Thanks for that, Tracy. Okay, so what we can do here is, I mean, this was my thought process, guys, with the meeting. What I wanted to do was run through the specifics, requirements of this particular ordinance, being that there was a vote Thursday night, so that we could make sure that things were interpreted correctly. If based on the information provided by us, if it needed to be modified, it could be modified in the meeting next Thursday, that type of thing. So if we want to take a step back, change that thought process, and invite someone from the drainage district to come before us and simply just give his opinion or thought or what he thinks, I'm perfectly okay with that. This is about us. When I say us, I mean the people of Livingston Parish trying to figure out what's best for Livingston Parish and do the right thing. So I'm totally cool with that. This representative that Gary's speaking about, you're welcome to come to the podium and start talking about the specifics and how you feel about this ordinance.
Jamie, you and Wesley want to come up? Wesley, you want to come up? Whoever wants to come represent it, we just need to figure out the benefit of protecting the floodplain to the parish.
Is protecting the floodplain the same thing as protecting the homeowner? That's the question we want.
Absolutely. We're going to let them make the presentation.
If someone made a presentation that they raised those for the homeowner, he'd have been protected.
Okay, so we're going to discuss this more next Thursday night, guys, but state your name and...
My name is Wesley Kennebrue. I'm Gravity Drainage District 1, Denham Springs. And number one, I am 100% for the homeowner. For every homeowner in my district, everybody that lives in my district, I am for them 100%. I do have one little scenario for you guys here to show. Just down on Amy Church Road, we had a little rain event last week. From 2 years of pictures right here showing that a person built a house up next door to his neighbor, and it shows the consequences of what it did to his neighbor, where the water stood and all that. People, you can give them all now. And I guess to throw the biggest part, because I've always wanted to say this, and John Wascom, you had it a while ago about it, this ordinance was back 20 years ago. This is my personal opinion from what I experienced throughout the years. Because I had people that flooded in 2016. I had grown men bigger than me that I had to put my arm around because they sat there and cried. But they explained to me, because I knew I was good, because in 1983 I didn't get water. I have one homeowner that told me, and this is all hearsay, but they were here, I wasn't here, that the water come out of the ditch next to the high school in 83 at 41 and a half feet, came out of the banks, filled the front yard up, stopped, then drained off. They were good. In 2016, at 41 and a half feet, the water was starting to go into his house. His house is 3 foot off the ground. So there's been a lot of fill, there's been a lot of stuff going on. Now, homeowners wanting to build, I buy me a piece of land, I want that land to be my land. I work my hard to get there, but you gotta look 10 years from now. I build my house up, put it up here where I'm not in the floodplain no more, I saved myself. But what did I do on my neighbor? That's the only thing that gravity drainage does when we go do our job. What are we doing downstream and upstream to protect our constituents? 10 years from now, my house has been there, 100 people around me have done the same thing. My house no longer is above floodplain, I'm back in the flood. Because you keep building and building and building. Now, if you can build, and I could build my property up 4 foot, 6 foot, 8 foot, but in the backyard, I can make that 6 foot of water that I'm blocking, or that area I'm blocking, I can put in a hole in my backyard. You're good, because that's what you do your work for. Subdivisions, you don't need retention ponds, you need dry. You need nothing but dry ponds where the water can go in. But this right here, just let y'all know, the first picture is 2017. It shows a house and a vacant lot. Second picture is and then you see the little black broken lines where the water was standing when it would rain, when we get a good rain event. I'm not sure exactly what year.
It's just the
Ground elevations. Then in the next picture you'll see is the house was built. This is his neighbor. He built up 2 foot, pretty wide area. And then you can see the ground elevations. He even did a little retention in the back. But to the elevations and the shots that we got, it wasn't enough. It needed to be more. But he ends up putting water on his neighbor. And the next picture was this last weekend. That's what his neighbor looked like. That's where the water was almost up to his house. Water was flowing. Now, drainage, there is a drainage problem. Everybody says it's all drainage. The number one thing you need to look at is when it rains and that water backs up and it quits raining. If that water sits there for 2 days, there's a drainage problem. But if that water's gone in 2 hours, there's no drainage problem, depending on how much water falls at one time. But that's the thing we look for. I got a subdivision down south that we're fixing to go do some work in, and I was fixing to walk in there and say, y'all, this is what I'm gonna do to y'all's neighborhood. I got a lot of feedback, I got a lot of complaints, so I went down there and I met with the homeowners. And then they explained to me what the water does. And luckily that day, it went to pouring down when I was talking to them. And as I sat there and watched this water rise, exactly what they said did. So I didn't have to go through their property and rip holes and tear this, and they had problems. I found out where the problem's at because I listened to the homeowners. But listening to y'all, I understand this ordinance. This ordinance will benefit 10 years, 20 years from now. It's not gonna benefit today or tomorrow. Because you let it happen once, twice, until everything's built up. And I think the proof is in the pudding from 1983 where the water elevation came up at 41 and a half feet. Not looking at the 46 feet, that happened. But look at the water elevation at 41 and a half feet in 2016 and see how much more water there was. That's why we feel that this field needs to be appropriate. But yes, it needs to take care of the homeowner. But as long as it works out, if you have a small piece of property, build on piers. If you have a big piece of property and you could put, because we don't have a problem with drainage, we have a problem with putting the water somewhere. We have nowhere for our water to go. And when you build up, you're just taking more places for where water sits now. So as long as you got the retention behind it and do what it needs to do, I think we'd be all right.
Well said. Appreciate that comment. Thank you, Wesley. Now, Mr. Bubba Harris would like to make a comment. We're gonna try to get a couple more and then we're gonna wrap this up.
In '83, with that flood, I was standing at the corner of 4H Club Road and Florida Boulevard whenever the water broke across Florida Boulevard. We didn't have all the development back then that we have today.
You're right.
And that's another reason that we had the flooding in 16 that we had.
Yeah.
Because the 1983 flood scared a lot of people, and that's when they all went to building up so high. And I don't blame them for it, you know.
Understandable, but
I guess
it's just so much more development right now
right.
than we've ever had.
One quick question. Go ahead, sorry.
I don't know. I'm not an engineer. what determines a 100-year flood?
There's a number. Somebody, I don't have my piece of paper with me. Y'all know what the number of a 100-year flood is, Jamie?
The base flood elevation is the 100-year flood. So whatever, I mean, it's based off of a model, just like we've done for Grace Creek and any other model that's done. That's what determines everything. So it's
The only, go ahead, I'm sorry for cutting you off.
I'm sorry.
No, the only question I have, and thank you for all of those statements, and I know you're speaking from the heart, but the real question I have, guys, is the root cause the extremely large residential developments that we've placed upon us in Livingston Parish, or is the root cause the private individual citizen, with 2 or 3 acres?
I think it all added together.
Okay, so to me, it's the massive projects where you're piling up and you're changing the flow of water that was flowing through an area from rain that was from further up north, But that being said, that's just an opinion. I do agree that we should do more studies and find out more information
Don't go
and
towards
help
just
get this right.
root cause to subdivisions to homeowners. It ain't that too. It is drainage. I mean, there's rivers that
It
are
is.
silted up.
I
There
agree
are
with
ditches
you.
that silted up that we have to. And 10 years ago, 15 years ago, not talking bad about anybody else's source core. If we saw something needed to be done, we went and did it. My boss tell me, go get a machine, go dig it out, get it up.
Right.
Today, we can't do that. We have to go
You're
through a
limited on
process.
your ability to
We
fix
can
problems.
get it done.
I agree.
But it will take longer to do, and I want homeowners to understand we have to tell them.
Okay, real quick, we're gonna let Gary speak for about 2 minutes, and then we're gonna grab the guy with the blue shirt, and then I gotta ask for a motion to get out of here.
Okay,
So real quick, Gary.
I mean, if y'all aren't ready, you can leave and we can
Yeah,
continue to
I
talk.
was
I mean,
gonna see if we can
if
make
you
a
need to
motion
go,
to
you can
continue
go,
the
and we can continue to talk about this. I guess we talk about subdivisions and homeowners. What we ought to talk about is engineered dirt versus non-engineered dirt. And I don't know if I don't wanna try to complicate things, but dirt that is brought in for subdivisions is dirt that has been engineered. It is dirt that has retention. It is dirt that we've analyzed, the upstream and downstream effect, and we have looked at the impact of bringing that dirt, and we have created retention to hold that water. And when an individual goes out and stacks dirt up on their property to build their house, that is unengineered dirt that we have no idea what the impact is that occupies the floodplain. And so I guess in just to clarify something that somebody had some concern about, what Betsy said, ideally bringing no dirt into the floodplain would be great, and net zero fill would be ideal. This is a step toward that end, and to do nothing just will exacerbate the problem and make it worse quicker. So that was the only thing I want to say. The gentleman in the blue
Yeah, let's
shirt.
go with the gentleman in the blue shirt. Okay.
Hey, I'm Shane Marler. So the question I have, we're talking about all this engineering and studies. So why don't we have an engineer quantify some of these numbers? Let's get them to run a 1 acre, half acre sample with 3 foot, 2 foot pad and say, look, it mitigates or raises the water level a certain amount. We're all just assuming, none of us up here are engineers and have run calculations. I mean, the parish, this is easy. Just hire somebody to work a calculation. I believe the result of that would be minimal.
In specific areas.
And then my
right?
other question is, why are we in such a hurry to pass this ordinance?
We're not. It's been
I
2.5 years.
I hope we're not.
But I mean, we call a special meeting at 9 o'clock in the morning. I mean,
Well, the reason we called the
I mean,
special
you may be
meeting.
saying it's not in a hurry, but what your actions is showing me it is.
Well, no, I called for the special meeting, and it was because we wanted to get the word out to make sure that all was informed, and that we could go back and
But
we
this
could
isn't
go through this to
time
make
for
sure.
constituents at all. This is 9 o'clock in the morning. Most people are working.
Well, we're hoping that the press will get the word out about what was talked about in the meeting before next Thursday night, when the vote becomes law if passed.
To answer your question,
So-
we've had six ordinance committee meetings that were scheduled to address this ordinance. Now,
Has an engineer been,
yeah, we've had engineers talk to them. Look, trust me, I'm not an engineer.
but what I'm saying is, y'all retained an engineer to do some study work and show numbers.
I've got a,
Eddie, if we pile dirt up in a flood zone, does it make it worse or better? I mean, if we stack up 3 foot of dirt with slope, do we raise the static water level? And if we do it 1,000 times, do we raise it 1,000 times more than one do?
Every cubic yard of dirt you put in the floodplain, you're having maybe it's almost immeasurable, negative effect, but you are having a negative effect.
Is
So
it
if you have
possible?
if you have 4 foot of water in your house and you add a 1 inch, did it not flood because of the 1 inch?
But
I mean, we
on that,
picked
how
them
many
up.
people-
Minimal.
How many people barely kept water out of their house or barely stayed under the 4 foot mark where they only had to dig out
So
4
look,
foot
when
of
it
sheetrock
rains,
versus
when it
8 foot of
rains, the
sheetrock?
houses didn't flood when it rained. The rainwater
I
didn't.
got places in my district
Hey,
that
Jamie,
flooded.
did
But
last
listen,
week
but
rain?
look, the majority of the flood come from the backwater. So if
No,
that
not
water was
last
able to
week.
get out,
okay, so let's put one
if
down,
the water was
guys.
able to get
Listen,
out,
real quick, guys. I apologize. Something came up major for me after this meeting was scheduled. I gotta leave. I turned this meeting over
It's okay,
to.
Shane, I think we're working to the right thing.
I think we are too. One thing I'd like to say is I would agree in the fact that I would like to see some models. I know I talked to somebody yesterday. I think there's some professors out there that can present models. If so much rain falls here, what happens? If so much rain falls here, that can help us determine, how to move forward with this dirt field ordinance. I think that I would like to see us take a step back and really do some research and look at this thing and try to figure out exactly what needs to happen in the future. I have to leave, and I apologize, and I hope y'all have a wonderful, wonderful day. I turn this meeting over to the co-chair of Livingston Parish Council, Gary Frog Talbot.
Hi, my name is Gerald Burns. I just wanted to ask a question about the ordinance. I understand the whole process and the problems with localized flooding, but this ordinance addresses floodplain. It doesn't say it's in floodplain. This ordinance addresses everywhere in Livingston Parish, floodplains and non-floodplains. Am I correct?
Well, X is a floodplain, it's just not a special hazard floodplain.
No, this ordinance doesn't say that. It doesn't differentiate.
We got three, tell me if I'm wrong, we got X, A, E, and A, do we have some other?
But this addresses.
No, I'm talking about in the parish, what do we have?
This ordinance addresses field dirt everywhere in the parish, whatever floodplain it is. It doesn't say that. So everybody in Livingston Parish has to go by this if you're out of the floodplain?
Yes, sir.
Why would we do that? Why would you want to limit field dirt in top of a hill somewhere?
How many people,
That's why.
does anybody have any statistics on how many people in X flooded in 2016?
A lot.
So if we,
If you order X though, the way the ordinance is written, you could easily have it in here, most
But the ordinance doesn't say
certified that you can.
that's all. I'm
Well,
questioning.
so that's the point you were making. If we put in there that people in X can.
Well, I don't agree with it anyway, but
I got it.
I'm just.
Okay.
Lawson Covington Real Estate. One question, we represent a lot of developers and that I've been asked, and the fear is, we feel is coming, is that FEMA's gonna raise base flood. Would y'all be willing to grandfather, we get a developer on a 200 or 300 lot subdivision that's under the ordinance, and they come in and raise base flood, and it changes him? Would y'all be willing to grandfather that?
Jamie, can somebody come speak to re-engineering a subdivision? If we build a subdivision and then BFE is changed, how big an impact is it to re-engineer retention and to create that situation?
All right, so obviously, anytime FEMA wants to, well, but FEMA does have a schedule of whenever they go out and remap a community. So that's going to happen. Communities are going to be remapped. And a property that's in an X zone now, in 10 years, could possibly be in an AE zone. Okay, we've seen that. We saw it back in 2000, whenever we remapped. 2001 we remapped. 2012, a lot of areas were added to the floodplain that weren't previously in the floodplain. If a subdivision, if FEMA does go in and remap a community, whenever they do, any lomas that are issued prior to that point in time, if they're not included in the remapping process, those go away. So all those properties would go back in the floodplain, and the community would be responsible for completing a new LOMA for that subdivision that was previously lomed out, unless it was already incorporated into the mapping process, okay? So that's what the community providing the information drives FEMA removing an area that was removed previously by a LOMA, whenever they issue the new flood insurance rate maps. If a subdivision had to go in and change, say an existing subdivision was in place, take my subdivision for instance, if Acadiana Place was automatically put into the floodplain, there are things that could be done to remove that subdivision from the floodplain even after it was, even after FEMA came in and remapped, raised the flood elevations and things along those lines. We could add additional detention, changing out the culverts, anything along those lines to reduce the amount of water that's coming into the subdivision and being held in that subdivision. So there's a lot of things that can be done. And that's just a matter of doing a drainage impact study, putting in the infrastructure that needs to be done. And it's something that's going to be done. It's part of the maintenance process through a lot of the communities that we have, a lot of the neighborhoods that we have all throughout the parish.
So I think
The answer would be no, they don't just get grandfathered in, they would have to read.
Well, my question is, if they're a foot below and they raise base flood 12 inches, or if they're 18 inches below and they're still good and they raise it to where they can't put more than 24 inches now, then they're gonna be in a bad shape. For the rest of their development.
In this ordinance, it only applies to individual property owners, not subdivisions.
Well, no, Jamie, it actually applies to every permit boss.
Every
So
permit?
in essence, if a subdivision is engineered and given this ordinance the way it would, if you engineered a subdivision in the future, you would be sure that you put enough dirt in it to get you to where all you had to do would put a 2x6 or 2x12 on the ground to get the BFE. If FEMA came in, let's say a guy builds a subdivision, he's 3 lots into it, and the flood and the BFE changes, is there a way to re-engineer that subdivision, or would the fill ordinance as written, how would it apply to it? Caleb called me, Johnson asked me that question last night, and I told her, I said, as the ordinance is written now, that all those lots bought after or developed after the flood change or the base flood change would apply to this, this would come into effect. Ultimately, everything falls under this ordinance. The problem is if it's engineered up to a certain level, it really doesn't apply because you're not asking to fill dirt on it. You know what I'm saying?
It applies, but it doesn't because you're already there. And so if they changed the BFE and you were already there, and all you had to have was 18 inches of dirt, it would still apply, but it wouldn't change anything, because you could put the 18-inch dirt pads.
You're still going, yeah.
No, if you're already having to add 18 inches and then raise another foot, you're gonna be above the ordinance.
Well, the question is, why would you, I'll tell you what you're
We're not
saying.
talking about one that's in X.
Why would you build it that way? And that's because you raised it up that high anyhow. The whole subdivision, and retaining for it.
Probably what Kayla talked on and asked you about, and we've talked about it, is if it puts someone out of the ordinance after they've already been approved.
Yeah, we'd have to discuss that. That was the first time it had been presented to me last night, was that my thought process was, if I was developing a subdivision now and this ordinance was in place and BFE was 10, then I'm gonna be sure my engineers got the finished grade of my lots at 9.6 or something.
Yeah.
So that all I had to do was put a form board up and I've reached base flood elevation.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So in essence, you still, depending on the size of the lot, had 24 inches or 36 inches to go. If that's not the case and you get stuck with lots, then yeah, you might have to address you might have to change the way you do your foundation under this ordinance. In an effort to protect the floodplain. Yes, Ms. Laws, you want to come up and...
Good morning. I was sitting listening today, and it's obvious to me that this ordinance is leaving a lot of questions more than answers. So my question to you, because it was asked earlier and he's gone, but I don't think it was ever answered what is the urgency? It's been 3 years since the 2016 flood. Unless we have a weather prediction, why can't we just slow it down and go through this ordinance? Because I believe we all agree we need something. But why can't we just slow it down and go through this ordinance to answer all the questions? I don't think that the meeting next week is going to allow people who have legitimate questions, who are probably at work right now and not here. So,
Ms. Laws, let me say, I serve on the ordinance committee, and we met 3 times that I know of about that ordinance. And every time that ordinance was, Mr. Talbot serves on that committee and tried to bring it to a vote to approve it. And every time the ordinance committee said, no, it's not ready. So we resolved as an ordinance committee to send it to a master plan committee to really look at this. And, but when we sent it to the council, they said, no, we want to go ahead and pass it now. I agree with you 100%. Even the ordinance committee agrees with you. We should have just let this committee look at this, put a lot of work into it, because we've already have a master plan that is 30% of it dealing with a master drainage for this parish. So, I mean, I agree with you. And I hope the rest of the council agrees with you as well. Let's get this to the committee, let them look at it before we just adopt it and then see what's in it. You know, I mean, let's look at this first before we do it. I agree with you.
I implore everyone to really consider that. I personally won't even be here next week, and I would love to know what's going to come of this discussion. So I don't believe that the information has been put out efficiently for everyone to be on the same page as to understand what is happening. Thank you.
The urgency to me, every day that we wait, they're building up more and more and more. So every day you wait, we're increasing the hazard of that floodplain. The level's gonna rise. That would be the only urgency. It's not that we do it tomorrow or the next week. We've been working to this since January. Having many meetings, we've discussed it. I think that's urgency.
Yeah, but I again, before I take my seat, I just urge you to understand that since it's going to affect everybody in Livingston Parish, as a constituent, I would love to know that my voice was heard.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Right.
Guys, I'm not trying to argue in favor of the ordinance or either way. What I'm trying to do is just get questions answered. We don't, and not that y'all not doing a good job trying to get that done. It's just I don't understand. The first thing that we said we was going to try to do earlier in the meeting was prove that protecting the floodplain was beneficial to all the residents, or the majority of the residents in the parish. How does the ordinance pertain to when we do a 50-acre subdivision and we do our master drainage plan for that, and how does this ordinance affect that when we do a drainage impact study or even a traffic impact study? Does this ordinance affect any of those things?
Randy, basically, if this ordinance is affecting every permit that's issued in the parish. Now, every permit, if you build a brand new subdivision, the first house you go to buy, if this thing is approved, this ordinance will have to be met to build that house. Now, if that subdivision was engineered so that the dirt level was already where it needed to be, then there would be no real need to add dirt. But they could be as much as 2 foot below base flood elevation on a small lot subdivision and fall within the guidelines of this ordinance and it not impact it. This ordinance will, I guess the thing to look at it is if it becomes part of the permit process, when you go to buy a permit, you will need to meet the guidelines of this ordinance. So in essence, everything is affected. The only difference is if you're buying or building on something that's been engineered and it has been fill mitigated or has had retention on it, then it's already addressed its impact to the floodplain and you wouldn't need to stack dirt on top of it.
And that's what that's the way I understand it too, so it would not affect the big subdivisions because that's already being done now. You already have something on the books that takes care of that now. So this ordinance would not affect 100 home subdivision or 50 home subdivision or 25, because they gotta go see Mr. Sam and make sure that they're doing things in the correct way. So this ordinance wouldn't affect that.
And we just made the drainage impact study harder. I mean, now you gotta go upstream, downstream, you gotta go on the 100-year floodplain.
And that is my point. So we already have regulations for piling up dirt for big subdivisions. So now this ordinance only affects the landowner, the small landowner. That's what I want to see is proof that those people, they have to make a sacrifice, whether it's $100 or $200 or whatever y'all came up with just a while ago. They also have to give up some certain rights. They have to do more things on the permitting process. Okay, that's maybe part of government or part of development, but we want to see what the benefit was that from those guys jumping through all those hoops. We want to see what benefit there's going to get in return for that. And it's natural to say, yes, well, we're not piling as much dirt as we did in the past. And I'm only speaking about from where I'm at. Maybe that dirt piling up in the past doesn't affect me as much as you think it does, but maybe it does affect that area where we're piling up too much dirt. So maybe that's where the ordinance needs to be at. And maybe it doesn't have to be with everybody else. Someone made a statement on y'all's panel about it's hard to get an ordinance to fit everything. You can't. There's no such thing as a perfect ordinance. Y'all know that. And every one of y'all are all dedicated. You're giving up your time to give the people in the community a voice to say and compete, and then y'all got the hardest decision. You got to take what you heard and make that decision. And you're trying to help people. And that's why you got elected. You never would have been there. You probably already done that, doing community service work or whatever you did, recreational. But now you have to take all these people, and you all represent a district. And if I'm going to use somebody to say Tab was sitting there, he's got to think about what helps his people. You know, Tracy's got to think about what helps his people. But that might not be the best way to look at it, y'all. It might not be. That's just what I'm saying. You may want to look to see what helps the whole parish. And that may be that you have to look at certain areas to do certain things and certain other areas to do another way. I do applaud y'all taking this on. That's probably more harder than the master plan. But the honest piece of advice I have, if you try to pass it parish-wide, you're going to have 50% at least mad at you no matter which way you go. 50%.
That always the case. Dude, you can, look, Randy, you know, you can, on issue A, you can have 50% mad at you, and then on issue B, it's the other 50% mad at you, and ultimately, you done made 100% of the people mad on two different issues. So
you mean like mosquitoes and drainage?
Yeah, like mosquitoes and drainage. I mean,
so it may be possible. It may be possible that one ordinance can't do it all, and it may be possible it has to be several ordinances. But the bottom line is you have a goal to keep people from flooding, and by removing field dirt from somebody in Albany might not be the way. And I'm gonna steal John's analogy he used a while ago. You know, if someone was piling field dirt up, he probably kept his house from being flooded. But maybe somebody else did it in Watson, he might have caused somebody else to flood. So there's different scenarios with different things. There's one more thing, and I'm gonna get out the way. The state legislature passed an act, and I can't remember what year, but I want to say it was in the 40s, and it was 655 and 656, and that has to do with surface water flooding your neighbors. So the state already has this covered. You don't have to over-regulate. You know, there's a lot of things y'all can do.
But on that, there is a law that says that. You are correct. But we have people that's piling dirt up, and they're not proving that they're not affecting their neighbor. So by the time it does affect their neighbor, they have a full house built and they're living there.
Right.
So what do? Tell them to tear their house down because they affect
No, you have no authority.
No, we need them to prove before they built it that they're not going to affect.
Those two acts only give authority to the neighbors. They don't give it to the legislative government body.
Right, and we've seen over and over again where people negatively impact their neighbor, and the neighbor doesn't have the ability to civilly go after them to correct the problem. So I mean, it is a catch-22 that, you know, what's too much government, what's not enough government, who's responsible for what. You know, ultimately, if everybody lived by the code where we looked out for our neighbor, shoot, we might not even need police, you know, but that's not the way human nature is, and that's why we have these rules, because not everybody's looking out for their neighbor, they're looking out for themselves, and so consequently, I mean, I'll tell you what spurred all this on. There is a young man that lives on a corner by where I showed you some of those pictures. And that young man played basketball and baseball with my son at Live Oak High School. And he calls you because he's concerned about the water approaching his house. And there's nothing you can do about it. All you can see is that as a parish, we have allowed people to stack dirt up unchecked without any engineering, and that's the issue. And that's what this is trying to correct, is to, I mean, this is gonna sound, engineered dirt is okay because we offset that dirt with the ability to protect the parish as a whole. Unengineered dirt, we do not have that ability. And so I think Wesley hit on it, that people at a flood elevation 83 were fine and they thought they were gonna be good in 16, and when water hit that number in 16, they were already flooded, and that just tells you that we have filled the floodplain up by that much. If the water at that man's house went up 4 feet between the same number in 83 and the same number in 16, that's how much we've impacted the floodplain by development. And you know, we've let this happen over years in this parish to get to this point. At some point in time, you've got to start protecting the floodplain.
But you do understand that you can protect the floodplains, like you said, and you can fix some of those problems. But the problem where I live is not because you stacked up dirt there now. It's because the Central Parish puts more pumps and more pumps and more pumps.
But Randy, let's look at where you're from. If you've got a southern wind, you know what I'm talking about?
No, you want to say an east wind.
East, whatever direction. When the wind blowing in the wrong direction, if you live down there, and you stacking the water up, and the Corps opened up the darn floodgates, and we putting extra water in Pontchartrain, and Ascension's got their pumps running, and water from Watson is hauling butt through Watson coming to you. The less dirt you got stacked up in that floodplain, the more capability you hold of dispersing that water and not flooding people. And the guy in Albany, Randy, it's just a fact that if the less dirt you have stacked up, the more holding capacity you have for that water.
Listen, you just said that the dirt stacked up kept the water on you. So how's the dirt now stacked up making the water come on me faster? You can't have it both ways. I know what causes flooding where I live. I'm an expert at that, okay? And you offer a little bit, that's okay. I'm not here for that. What I was saying earlier, I know for a fact, when you come here next Thursday at 6:30, there's gonna be 500 people that dig ponds in this place. And they're gonna be 1,200 people that are gonna be locked out, can't get in, and because they believe that a one fixed ordinance isn't what works. They know you're dedicated, they know you're working, they know you're trying to fix the problem. Just don't try to put a one fixed ordinance for everybody, because it don't work that way. The people that is capable of doing that, you have probably a committee, and I know you don't want to give that up probably, but I think the master plan is gonna be able to say, okay, they better look at it in sections. You have so much legislative time and other problems you have to do, you can't work this out in the time that it takes to see where this ordinance is gonna work and where it's not gonna work. And again, that's what I meant by it should be done for the whole parish. And
Young lady, you wanna come up? You've had your Paisley sitting there, and I think if everybody's good with this, we're gonna let her make her comment, and then we're gonna move forward and we're gonna let her make a comment, and we'll just adjourn this thing.
I'm Nancy Gervais. I live on Avance Road, and I'm approximately 500 yards from gravity drainage. On December 28th, I was 3 inches from flooding for my third time. So I just need, I respect the ordinance. I respect everything that you guys are doing for future growth in the parish, but I've been here since Katrina. I don't need to flood again at my house. I just need to know what's happening with the ditch next to me that belongs to the parish and gravity drainage in front of me, because nobody comes to look when my house is flooding.
Avance Road is where?
It's in my district.
Okay.
Ma'am,
Get
that's
her
not,
address and you
that's
can-
not Wesley's district.
No, that's fine. We're gonna get it taken care of.
500 yards is where gravity drainage is. They pass my house when it's filling up.
So it sounds like the
you mean the
solution,
company,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, okay, yeah, I know
The
where you
trucks
are.
drive through the water, the trucks drive
After you get
through
off
the
Walk
water,
North,
yes.
Yeah.
so
okay.
it sounds like the solution to your problem is cleaning those ditches and getting that water out.
And yeah,
I mean, that's the solution.
thousands of homes have been built right around me within a half a mile, and that's fine. I'm a Katrina transplant. I love Livingston Parish, but I can't do it again.
All right.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm good.
Got a motion, got a motion, Mr. Harris,
I'll second.
second by Mr. King, any objections?
All in favor?
If nobody
Sorry,
says
did
it,
that for you, Chairman?
No